Welcome to the next part of the Building a Rick and Morty app series. In the last part, we put together these nice looking cells, particularly polished up the shadow and whatnot, as well as got actual characters being shown. We're going to continue from where we left off. Before we jump into things, drop a like down below, hit subscribe if you're new here, and let's dive right in. So two things we're going to handle today are when we tap on a cell, we want to notify the controller that, hey, we should open up a detail page for a particular character. The other thing that I'm going to start to talk about is how we're going to know that we need to show a spinner at the bottom here if we need to load in more characters, and then how do we actually make that call. And one thing I just noticed actually while scrolling is the shadow at the bottom of this collection view, if you look really closely, it actually gets cut off by the tab bar. So let's actually first and foremost fix that. The reason it's getting cut off, if we go to our character list view, if we go to the collection view inside, you'll see we had added a section inset with a top, left, bottom, and right margin. We're just going to add a bottom margin of 10 and give that a build and run. And we should see at the bottom we have a little bit more space now, and the entirety of the shadow should in fact be showing in both light mode as well as dark mode. So cool, so that out of the way, let's talk about handling a tap on a cell. Well, it turns out that our collection view delegate is where we'll do that, and we have extended our view model here to conform to the delegate protocol. So these are all data source functions here particularly. Now we are going to say did select, and you'll get the autocomplete here, and the function is collection view did select item at index path. So the first thing we want to do is unhighlight that item, aka deselect it with an animation. So we have done that, which is awesome. Now we want to know, what object did the user actually select on, aka which character. So I'm going to say character will be from our characters collection, the element that was tapped at. This index path is an inbound argument to this function, so we'll actually be able to get what we tapped on. And now we want to notify the character view controller. So how do we go about doing that? Well, we're going to use a pattern that we have already seen, which is the delegate pattern. So we're going to go back to our view model here, and at the very top, if you recall, we had added this function. And what I'm going to do is add in a new function right here in this protocol. So we're going to say let's do did select character, and this is going to take in a character which will be a RM character, just like this, just like so. So now that we've got that set up, this error should go away. Awesome. And then down here we can simply go ahead and say delegate did select, and this should be a question mark, did select character, and we can pass in character. Now, if you recall, our view is conforming to this delegate, so if we come down here, we should now have a build error if we try to build, and that's correct because we need to add in the implementation for this new function we have added. Now we're in the view, we need to get this out to the controller, so how do we do that? We can somehow communicate it back. And actually, we're going to continue to use this protocol or this pattern that we've introduced, a delegate pattern. So I'm going to create now a delegate interface, aka protocol, for this view. So once again, we're going to take the name of the object and just suffix it with delegate. It's going to have any object here, so we can hang on to it in a weak capacity. So here I'm going to say public weak var delegate, which will be our protocol here. And we're going to have a single function in here, for now at least, and that's going to be called rm character list view, and we'll say character list view, which will be the type of the view, and this is just a common naming convention. And then we're going to have the actual remainder of the function name, which is going to be did select character. And then we can go ahead and pass in the character like so, and this is a RM character, not just character. And we can now call this function when we come down here. So we can say delegate, and again, this is the delegate of the view. We can say RM character list view, which is self, did select character, which is an inbound argument to this function. So we can just pass it up the actual call stack. Now back in our controller where this view is actually held onto, we're going to go ahead and say in setup view, we'll say that, hey, this view's delegate will be me, aka self. So now we can actually come in here and we can conform to this delegate, and it'll force us to obviously implement this particular function. So I'm going to put a mark here and say this is the delegate implementation. Now that we have the character here, we can actually go ahead and say open detail controller for that character. So we don't actually have a controller created for this yet. I'm just going to create an empty one so we can actually show opening it when we click on something, or rather tap on something. So bear with me while I create a folder here. We're going to create a folder, and I'm going to call this other under controllers. And we're going to want a view controller that we can push. And if you're not familiar with pushing, I'll describe that momentarily. So I'm going to go ahead and call this RM character detail view controller, since we're going to be basically showing a bunch of details about a particular character. So go ahead and create this, just like so. We're going to finalize this, add some documentation. So let's see, controller to show info about single character. Let's spell character correctly. We'll get rid of all of this jazz in here. And we are going to go ahead and just do some basic setup. So I'm going to say the background color of this will be system background. And we're going to have this taken a initializer. So rather override and have a custom initializer and take in a view model is what I should say. So let's just go ahead and create that for a quick second here. And I will explain this in a moment. We're going to call the super initializer. And we will also override the one with the coder since it is required. I'm going to add some comments here. These are lifecycle functions. Now, what we actually want to pass in here is a view model with a view model that is appropriate for a RM character detail view. Now, we haven't actually created this yet. We are eventually going to want to create this. So let me actually go ahead and create this view. I'm not going to fill anything into it since we are going down a rabbit hole at this point, but I'll create it for the time being. So we have this detail view here. We're going to want to eventually do something in here. And respectively, we're going to have a view model. So I'm going to create another file. It'll be a Swift file, and this one will be a RM character detail view model. So you can kind of begin to see this pattern between each of our views. It has a respective view model, and the controller is going to hang on to it. It's very duplicitous once you kind of get the hang of things and understand how things work. So this controller here, if I can find it, under other, is going to take in one of these. And the important thing here is we want to know which character are we showing the detail screen for. So this view model needs to actually pass in the character, right? So this is going to create a character with an RM character. So we're going to hang on to this character here, and just to exemplify this, what I will go ahead and do is just do one property in here, and that is going to be private var, public var, and this will be title, which will be a string, and we are going to return character.name, and we're going to uppercase this by saying .uppercase. So back here in our character controller, when we click on this, we can now create that view controller and push it. So we're going to say let detail view controller, I'll abbreviate it, will be RM character detail view controller. We're going to go ahead and instantiate it, and I want a view model, which makes sense. So I'm going to create the view model. Maybe I'll create it up above just to keep things nice and organized. Now this is particularly simpler, so we're going to say view model will be RM character detail view model. And this gets created, like I mentioned, with the character, which we're getting as an argument from this function, aka a parameter that's inbound. Now that we've created this, we can actually go ahead and say navigation controller, push a view controller, we'll say detail VC animated true. Now, what is this navigation controller nonsense? Because it looks confusing to me. So what it essentially is if you recall, in our tab controller, let's jump into there, we had created these 4 navigation controllers for each of our tabs, and we had set their root controllers to the character VC, location, episode, and settings. Now, what I mentioned originally was that navigation controller gives us this nice title bar at the top, but what I glossed over is that it gives us much more than that. It gives us this ability where you can have apps that kind of slide one screen onto another. And I'm going to show you an example from one of Apple's apps. So if you open up settings, This is a table view, right? A list of cells. You don't need to really know the specifics of it, but when we select something, you can see it like really slickly slid in this other screen. And we also are able to swipe back. Let's see if the simulator lets me do it. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's not. Looks like it won't let me do it, but you can tap back. To get that functionality, Navigation Controller gives it to us out of the box. And that's the notion of pushing and popping controllers. You're basically saying, push one onto the stack. So this is a character screen. When you push a new screen onto it, it'll slide in from this way. And this being like a z-axis, you're looking at the frontmost controller. So that's enough conceptual theory. Let's actually run it and click on its character and see what it looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Rick here. And just like that, we have opened up this other screen. There's obviously nothing there, but let's at least get the title to show up. So we can go ahead and here we can say that the title will be viewModel.title, which means we do need to hang on to this view model here that we pass into the initializer. So we're going to assign it like any other initializer, and we can say viewModel.title. Alrighty. Cool. So if you look at that, we now have this pretty obnoxiously large title showing up here. Now, perhaps we don't want it to be that large, which I particularly don't. So what I'm going to go ahead and do here is I'm going to say detailvc.navigation item, and then there's an option, large title display mode, and we're going to say never. For that particular view controller, that screen, we don't want it to ever show a large title. This looks a lot more appropriate. I've purposely capitalized the name of the character here, but we can click on any of these, and basically what we're going for is we're going to want to be able to show kind of like a profile for a character, all their information, all the episodes they've been in, all the locations that are relevant to them, and then we should be able to click further down. Let's say we want to find information about, episode 47 that Rick appeared in, or Morty appeared in, or, agency director appeared in. We're going to be able to do all that. So I know I mentioned talking about, unlimited scroll. I'll briefly start talking about it, and then we'll cut over to a new video since this has taken a little longer than what I anticipated. So now in our character list view, when we scroll down, we need to do two things. A, we need to know once the user has scrolled to the bottom. And B, what we want to know is, okay, if you're at the bottom, do we even have more characters to load? In other words, like, should we show a spinner? Should we even bother trying to make an API call? And we're going to add all of that business logic to our character list view model here. So I'm going to come into here and say that this is, first of all, let me add a comment here. View model to handle character list view logic. And we'll add some more documentation later on, but essentially, I'll add a mark here. So these will be collection view implementation below here. Essentially what we want in here are two things. A, and these will be public, we're going to say var should show, should show load more indicator, which will be a Boolean. I'll return false for now. We'll implement this in a second. And if we know that we should show this, we also probably want a function which is going to be to fetch additional characters. So we have fetch characters here. So I'm going to go ahead and say, add a function here, or a documentation string for this function. And I'll go ahead and say, fetch initial set of characters. And I'm going to put in quotes or parentheses 20 here because that's how many we get. And here I'm going to add another function, and this is going to be public func fetch additional characters. And this is kind of self-explanatory. So paginate if additional characters are needed. So once the user scrolls to the bottom, we want to first do two things. We want to fetch new characters, but on the view side, we want to know if we even should show a particular spinner at the bottom. We're going to leverage a footer to show the spinner. So let me just briefly add some of the functions that we're going to end up using. So to get the scroll position, what we can do is actually use a scroll view delegate. So what that actually means is if we jump over to the character list view, and if you click into jump to definition of a collection view, it actually inherits from UI scroll view. And UI scroll view has a nice delegate on it, which lets us basically get a bunch of information about the scroll position of that scrolling view. So we're going to go ahead and conform to that protocol, just how we've done here with an extension for the collection view. I'm going to say mark. This will be for the scroll view. And let's go ahead and say UI scroll view delegate. And the function we care about is scroll view did scroll. And we'll want to do some math in here to figure out, if we're at the bottom. And what we'll also want to go ahead and do is we're going to say guard. And this is going to be should show load more indicator, right? So if we know that we should show this, then it's worth even doing, the math to see if we're at the bottom. Otherwise, it's kind of silly, right? We have nothing more to load. And in terms of knowing if we need to load more stuff, the way we're going to figure that out is with the info that we originally had gotten back from the API that I ignored earlier. So the info we're going to say is the response model dot info, just like that. And if you recall, this info that we had added has 4 things on it. So there's pages, count, next, and previous. So we can essentially just say, hey, do we have a next URL? If we do, go ahead and load it. And if we don't, you don't have to load it. We can optionally do the math and figure out like if we have in our models like 20 things and we have a total count of, let's say, 100, we know that there are going to be 5 pages. But doing all that, it's a little verbose and it's not really necessary. So what I want to do is in our view model, we are going to hang on to not only the characters and the view models, but we are going to hang on to the info. So we can go ahead and say API info will be of type this dot info. And by default, it's going to be nil. And it is going to be a mutable var, so it's not a constant. And what we're going to do in here is we are simply just going to say self.api info is info. And this way we can just check for that next URL. So down here, what we want to do is we're going to say if API info.next doesn't equal nil, right? If this doesn't equal nil, we have another URL. This next URL will actually give us the results of the next page of characters. The API returns that for us, and if you're wondering how the heck I know that, if you actually come back to the API documentation and go to this, you'll see an example right here actually. Next will give us this Rick and Morty .com API characters, and then it gives you like page 2. So if I copy and paste this into a tab, here is the second page, and just like that, we have another URL here for page 3, etc., etc. So that's how that is going to work, and we need to fetch characters here. That's how that's going to work, and let's see, I'll cut the video here. We actually went through quite a bit. Drop a like before clicking away. Hit subscribe if you're new here and haven't subscribed and into iOS. Share on all the socials. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next part.